Thanks for inviting me again. Thanks for finding the right board. Super excited to tell you about my research. So I was here last year. Sorry if you were here for that talk, because the first half is pretty much the same. But everybody wants to see videos of baboons, so I'm going to show you them all again. And I'm going to show you some research that I've done over the summer as part of my JRF here at Churchill. Cool.
I was also going to say, this is really informal, so feel free to stop and ask questions at any point.
And tell me to slow down if I speak too rapidly, because I tend to do that.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm interested in how animals make decisions, and animals need information to make decisions. So I'm really interested in how individuals make decisions about foraging, reproduction, where to go. For example, this is a bit of a troop of baboons making a decision about where to sleep at night. To do that, these guys need to know about predators, they need to know about the quality of the sleeping cliff, they need to know if there's another troop around, they need to get information to do that. So animals can get information in one of two ways. So they can get information through personal needs, personal information, and that's when an individual goes out and then samples its environment until it finds something that's actually worth eating, in this case, instead of twigs and rocks and leaves, which aren't very edible. So this individual has perfect information about the environment, but it's costly and time-consuming to collect that information. But these guys can be considered information producers. They're the ones going out and producing information that others could use in the form of social information. So social information is when you pay attention to the discoveries and information produced by other individuals. For example, this baby is learning about where to find water from her mother. And these guys can be considered information scroungers. So to summarize the personal information and social information trade-offs, personal information can be quite costly to collect. It's time-consuming, as I mentioned before. But the problem with social information is it can be outdated. So there's a problem, like an individual might choose to use social information because it's quite cheap to collect social information, but it's not always accurate. So I'm going to show you a video of a meerkat, just to make it, yeah, I had to put a meerkat in here. So this individual is, we're trying to do an experiment on them, so just ignore the little cup. What happens is the trade-off between personal and social information. So the meerkat's going to dig a hole, it's looking for a prey item, and they dig, this is what meerkats do all day, they just dig holes in the sand. And it's not collecting any personal information about the environment and predators in the environment. And of course that's a bad decision, because one can be predated if you don't collect personal information about the environment and just rely on social information. So one question you might be asking is, why is there an emu in the South African desert? Another question, the one that I'm interested in answering, is how and why do individuals differ in their personal and social information use to make decisions? And so this talk, I'm going to show you these questions that I've been addressing this summer, and they're broadly two questions. Who produces information? So who are those information producers? What phenotypes do those information producers have? And then the other one is who can scrounge information? And I'm hopefully going to convince you that social networks are really important for this. It makes sense because, yes?
Can I just ask what phenotypes are exactly?
Oh yes, characteristics of an individual that, like rank and sex and age class and personality, things like that. Yeah, so sorry. So who can scrounge information? That I'm going to hopefully convince you is related to social networks, and this particular question is broken up into three because it's quite complex. So our networks are sorted, and I'll tell you why that might be important later in the talk. Who actually acquires information, social information, and which social network is most useful for acquiring social information. But I don't want you to be bored the whole time, so I'm going to break this talk into two parts. The first one is background, this is basic behavioral ecology of baboons, because they're the most awesome creatures on Earth. And then the second part hopefully won't end up looking like this, will be a bit of science, but I'm jam-packing that more full of videos as well, so that you don't fall asleep. Cool, so if you haven't guessed so far, I study Chacma baboons. They're highly social, savanna-living primates. I got most of my money from my PhD trying to convince people that they're a really good study system for understanding human evolution, because they get around in multi-male, multi-female groups in the desert. And I study two troops, and I've done this for 6 years now. I work in Namibia, which is the best country on Earth, because it is a land of superfluous road signs. We can understand that. It's also, on the way to my field site is the enigmatically and hopefully not eponymously named Gross Barman. There's also this, the most amazing food products, salty cracks, which are actually delicious crackers, even if they are salty cracks. This something called chocolate, which is both mild and spicy at the same time. And it is actually mild and spicy at the same time. The hot and spicy one is spicy and spicy at the same time. And then there's also this iodized table salt, which is actually pouring on chickens and not for on food. So Namibia is awesome. the place that I work is called Talbis. It looks something like this. I do work in a desert, and it's basically a desert because it gets about 30 to 200 millimeters of rain a year. But there's nothing else that even remotely looks like a desert except for the fact that there's a sandy riverbed. So for the most part, I'm walking around in hills. The baboons prefer to be up in the hills, but it is absolutely gorgeous. If you get to the top of a hill, it's fantastic. This is the only flat path of my entire field site, except for this this river that bisects the whole thing. So the baboons are tied to this ephemeral riverbed. It only has water in it once every couple of years, and it only floods properly throughout the whole year once every 20 years, like in 2011 when I was there. This is our camp, the road coming into camp. Right, so field work with baboons looks something like this. They're completely habituated to observers on foot. This is me a very long time ago, following some baboons around. And when I say they're completely habituated, I mean that they're quite happy to, like these guys, fall asleep in front of us, and they basically behave normally, except when all the adults are asleep and the babies are curious and aren't being lactated for, then they come and find us quite a curious thing to watch. So field work is something like this. So this is that big ephemeral riverbed that I was telling you about, and this is the hills habitat, so they're off to a sleeping cliff here. And they're completely relaxed with us being around there. And this is that blessedly flat part, which they never go into. But they're demonstrating the cute jockeying that baboons are so well known for. So a colleague of mine and I did our PhDs there quite a while ago, so here he is. We're all headed to the waterhole at the moment. And he's following a baboon and writing down everything that they do onto a handheld computer. The baboons are amazing at getting around these kinds of environments. They always prefer sleeping on cliffs to in trees, so owls never sleep in trees. And so you can see Harry with his little handheld computer. He's collecting data on this baboon here. And it's around about this point that he'll put the baboons out of sight and then regret ever doing any field work with baboons because he's stuck at the top of this massive cliff. You also get these most amazing tan lines. Yeah, Harry up on the top. His baboon is here now. Anyway, so it is fun. I'm Australian and there are no primates in Australia, and I went and did a baboon PhD without knowing anything about primates, and I was so surprised at how human-like they were. They really are they are really good models for studying the evolution of humans. And if that wasn't enough to convince you, then of course baboons are ideal for understanding human evolution. Not that I'm interested in that, but they give me money. So they pop out and they're really, really cute. This one's about 2 weeks old, really sweet, and they're so social. They spend 24/7 with each other, and they greet each other all day, every day. It's ridiculous. So this is a juvenile female playing with somebody else's infant female. Obviously the infant female is loving it. And they're very sweet. So this is a subadult male and a juvenile male, and they're hugging each other because there are goats in the riverbed. So the goats always come along with goat herders and dogs, and the dogs are trained to chase the baboon. So whenever they hear the goat bells, then they run up onto a cliff and hug each other because they're scared. Totally sweet. And they do this from a tiny, tiny age. So this guy's only about 5 weeks old, and this one's about 1 week old. And they're already embracing each other. It's amazing. This is not sexual at all. This is another way that a baboon greets another baboon. So this is an adult female. She's mounting a juvenile female. They're making eye contact and they're smacking their lips at each other. And then they also do the embrace thing where they grab each other's arms. So they'll be looking at each other going, it is so amazing. And they haven't seen each other for about 10 minutes. They keep doing it. It's great. So here's some video of baboons being social. So this is called a come hither face, that fin. So there's a long distance communication that they want to associate with each other. They can't actually embrace each other, so they're like, come over here and lip smack. And they do this when they're tiny. This one is only about 5 weeks old, and she's hugging her older aunt, actually, who's not even an adult female yet. But baboons are famous, well, most primates are famous for grooming. So they groom everywhere, including tails. They groom when they're upside down. They groom to buy tolerance for all sorts of commodities. So in our field site, baboons will groom more dominant baboons early in the morning so they can get into the patches that the other baboons are in. So they're buying access to food resources with this grooming behaviour. It's pretty fascinating to watch, and important, very important socially. So the flip side to being super social is that you're around other individuals all of the time, and that can lead to aggression between individuals. So this is an adult female who's being aggressive towards a subadult, almost adult female. This female is baring her teeth in submission of the adult female, who's flipped up her eyelids and is cat grunting at her. She's grabbed her haunches in a threatening manner. So she'll be going while this is going on, and she's baring her teeth so that the other female will let go. Hopefully this will go. Right, so this is a very angry female who's trying to be aggressive to somebody who she can't actually reach. So she's actually got her baby on, her infant on her back here, and she's flipping up her eyelids like I was telling you about and screaming her head off at this other individual. We can get pretty intense in the baboons. This is an adult female attacking a juvenile male. They don't actually, most of the time in this kind of thing, they don't actually get hurt. He just got covered in sand and embarrassed and screamed his head off for about 10 minutes. But she's like super old. She's like the oldest female on the field site, so I was super happy for her for being able to boss somebody around who's actually technically higher ranking than her. But it's when the males come in that things get pretty real. So they have these amazing elongated canines. They're longer than lions' canines, and they're serrated on the back. So I put this one up here because you can see how it's the back of it is incredibly sharp. You can also see that he's got into a fight with another male and has had his lip split open. And they use these to fence with each other. So they'll come up. They often end up with injuries like this, where they lose their teeth break off because they've been fencing with other males' giant teeth. And males are pretty horrible. Male baboons use sexual coercion for access to females. They'll use females as pawns in these giant political games. And the females obviously can't do very much about that. There are some strategies that females have, but for the most part they end up looking like this female, not very happy. And sometimes it sustain absolutely massive injuries. So this female ended up with a 15-centimeter gash in her arm. She was actually perfectly fine. There was a lot of blood, but it was quite shallow. This one, on the other hand, is not very shallow. That got all the way down to her skull, split it open, and the male that did that to her continually split it open. Anyway, she died last summer. Poor old thing. But it gets really intense when the males fight with other males. So you can see they are trying to fight, fence with each other's faces, and so they end up with these massive gashes all over their faces. And if you've just eaten, I'm really sorry. The next two slides are pretty horrid. So close your eyes if you're squeamish at all. So this male has ended up with a canine slash that has gone from the corner of his mouth all the way up the side. He's perfectly fine. He's still in the troops and still copulating with a lot of females. He not only has it on this side, but he has it halfway up the other side and a giant hole in his cheek there. So his nickname is the Joker now. He survived that. This guy did not survive this injury. He obviously died because he couldn't eat anymore. So he had another male's canine came up under here and just ripped the front of his jaw off, and you can see his canines hanging down here. So these are his teeth ripped out the bottom. Okay, so that's so here's some video of some baboons being aggressive. They're not that intense. You can watch again. So this guy is drinking a water hole. This guy is trying to supplant him from the water hole. They all like this little spring because the water is really fresh. He looks around to see if this guy's gotten any coalitionary support from screaming and decided that it wasn't worth it. And then later on got really angry. So this guy was the one that was drinking, and the other three boys are all threatening him. So I'll show you some threatening. Sorry about my terrible videography. It's keeping baboons in film. So he's super upset. So these guys, it's called ground swiping, and it's a long distance indication that they're really unhappy. So all three of these other males have formed a coalition and are ground swiping and threatening the guy who's screaming. And then, so that guy is really upset. He's just slapping the ground. And then all three boys that formed that coalition then cement that coalition by grooming each other in a little group. Totally cute. They're all really little and cute at this stage. When they're this size, that they're not cute anymore. So this is what we call a wahoo rampage. The male is displaying to the other males in the area, being chased by the female who is screaming, who is just beaten up, and another male who was protecting that female. That male that was doing the chasing ended up with this hole in his cheek, and you can see the food falling out of it. He's not bothered by that, just continues to eat. Yeah, awesome. So, that is a very quick introduction to baboon behavioural ecology. So I'll go quickly as possible through some science, but hopefully keep you just as entertained with videos of that. So just to recap the questions that I'm interested in, the first one I'm going to show you is who produces information, and then we're going into that who uses and who scrounge social information from the producers. That's broken up into 3 questions: are the networks distorted, who acquires information, and which network is most useful. Right, so on to the first one. These are the phenotypes that I'm interested in. So I want to know whether producing information depends on your age. Maybe older individuals are more experienced and better at getting producing information. Whether it depends on your boldness. Maybe bold individuals are just better at exploring their environment. The high-ranked individuals have access to better resources, but are also better at scrounging, like entering patches that others have gone into. And sex. Males are always dominant to females and more explorative than females. I'm going to show you what I mean by boldness. Like I spent my entire PhD trying to estimate what boldness was, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. And I'm going to show you in a boldometer kind of way. So wherever the star appears is around about how bold or shy an individual is. So if there's a star here for a video, it means that this individual is really, really shy. If it's more towards this end, then that individual is more bold.
How do you measure boldness? And is it just how much they talk?
No, so it's their response to a novel food.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so this is boldness. So that individual's willing to smell a novel food, but not pick it up. So she's down here at this end. So it's all responses to novelty. But because if I give them an object, I never get it back. It has to be a little food item that they either disregard or eat. And it's much faster, but I'll show you how that doesn't always work soon. So this is something in the middle. So this individual is willing to interact with the food that I give her, but then she drops it and doesn't do anything else with it, but at least she's willing to pick it up. This is a little bit further along that scale. So this is an adult female, obviously with her baby on her back. And she's willing to pick it up and bite it a little bit and investigate it for a little bit longer, but still doesn't do very much with it. Her name is X-Mom. This is more typical, like most of the juveniles do something like this. So she's been giving her a bit of carrot. And then she sits and investigates it for quite a bit longer. She's not very good at handling this novel food, obviously.
Do you know if carrots are appetizing to them, or it might be not a boldness thing, but
yeah, whether there's individual variation in how they like the taste. Don't know. Not many of them actually taste it. So it's a good question. I try to test them mostly in the morning so that they're motivated to get new food, but yeah, that's one of the big problems with personality. That's why I'm getting out of the personality. There are problems with measuring it. So this is a typical super bold reaction. Her name is Toxicora, and she's willing to eat the food pretty much straight away, and then spends the next 2 minutes doing exactly that.
Cool. She used the same novel food, and then that looks different from carrot.
Yeah, right. So yeah, good question. No, because it won't be novel anymore. So every year I have a different novel food, and then I'm going to show you a video in a second to show you why I have to, within years, have different novel foods as well. So if they've seen the food before, I won't give it to them for their test of the novel food. So that was videos from 2 years. So carrot in 1 year, and then this is sweet potato that I've dyed blue to make it as novel as possible.
So does it depend on when they had their last meal, or?
So that's why I try to test them mostly in the morning. So that
yeah, but maybe they didn't have dinner last night.
Oh no, they forage all day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they spend probably 40% of their time foraging, and most of it's done in the morning in a 3-hour time block, and that's when I try and test them, because they're just crazy, want to eat because they've been sleeping on a cliff all night. I'm a bit worried if I test them in the afternoon, because they're way lazier in the afternoon, and I guess they're just going to a sleeping cliff and eating things along the way. So those tests all look quite nice, but actually they're quite clever creatures. And I learned very quickly that, so this is a very bold response, not the individual that actually is interacting with the novel food, which happens to be a hard-boiled egg that I've dyed red in this example, that was my very first year, but it's the other individual, this one here, that becomes a massive problem. So he was one of the very first individuals that I tested, and he learned that eating eggs is really good, and then just would appear out of nowhere, even if I checked that he's on the other side of the troop. So here this individual, this is a dominant male of the troop, actually isn't impressed with my egg at all. I'll take your little shit. tick would come every single time and then show my novel food to all of the juveniles in the zoo. It's actually doing these experiments that got me into the social learning experiments that I showed you guys last time I was here. It was that showing individuals what my novel food was, the little bastards. So, back to my question, who produces information? To do this, I gave the individuals a task, you guys will remember it from last time, where they had to find food, a food that they really, really like, it's corn kernels, in a box. So individuals have to be explorative enough to look inside the box, and as you'll see, not many do this. The box is a milk carton. So here's a series of videos of these experiments that I did, these hidden food experiments. So this is a dominant male of the other troop. This box has got lots of food in it that I know that these guys love. They can't smell it, obviously, otherwise he would eat it. He walks around for anybody else and then walks off. So not many baboons actually get into the box. So this task is actually quite scary for them, as you can see with this little female. She knows that there had been food. But some individuals are explorative enough to stick their hand in the box and then get food out. You can see this female here is eating the corn kernels that I put in the box. So,
sorry, does it depend on the color of the packaging?
The color of the packaging was the same for all of them. It was just the same.
Oh, was it? I thought the second one was white. Sorry.
Oh, it depends on which end that they open it at. And also they rip it, they just rip it to shreds anyway. So she'll get all of the food out of it and then she'll rip it up. Yeah. Right, so the probability that somebody finds food is dependent on two of the phenotypes that I tested. So here you've got the probability of finding food, obviously. And it depends on boldness, which is very exciting for my PhD research, but also their age class. So the age class and boldness category that found food the most out of that hidden food task were bold juveniles. So bold juveniles are producing more information. So throughout this, you have to think bold juveniles are the ones that are producing this kind of complex information. I've also done some experiments that show that for food patches, rank and sex also play a major role. So I'm going to keep showing you the results of all of these phenotypes. But at least for this series of experiments with a complex task, bold juveniles are really important. Okay, so who can get access to that information that's produced by those bold juveniles? So it's the shy adults that can't or haven't produced any information of their own. So can they associate with the bold juveniles to get that kind of information? They all want these corn kernels. So who has access to it? I'm going to argue that the social network is quite important. So this is a sociogram. So all of these baboons represent baboons. The lines between the baboons represent a connection between the baboons, and the thickness of that line is the relative strength of that connection. So if an individual grooms another individual a lot, then that is a really awful noise. Then this line will be thicker. So if we have a couple of individuals that produce information, let's say this green guy produces some green information, this blue guy produces some blue information, then the strength of the connection between their nearest neighbours might influence whether they can get that information. So it has been shown before that connection strength between individuals promotes information transfer. So something like this might happen. So this guy might have not enough of a connection to other individuals in the troop to get that information, and particular types of information will spread to individuals that have stronger connections with those knowledgeable individuals. Does that all follow? Okay, great. So what happens if there's assortment of the network and that bold juveniles just hang out with bold juveniles? For example, these black baboons might be juveniles and bold. This guy might produce information and it might go to this guy, but can information go any further than that if there's assortment in the network and individuals are only hanging out with the same phenotypes? So, are the networks assorted? That's the question that I wanted to look at, and as I said, I was going to do those 4 phenotypes that are important for producing information. To look at this, I was looking at just who was within 5 meters of focal individuals, so all of the time that we were walking around writing down what they did, we also wrote down who was within 5 meters of that particular individual. I did this for 2 trips and actually now 6 years, but I'm going to show you 4 years of data for this particular part because it's a horrible slide. I'm so sorry about that. So we've got the 4 phenotypes that I'm interested in, and 4 years. I didn't want to add 2 more because it would be a horrendously boring slide. And I'm going to populate all of these cells with either a plus sign if there's positive assortment and like bold individuals only hang out with bold individuals, for example. A negative sign if it's negative assortment and bold individuals hang out with shy individuals, and a slash if there's absolutely no assortment and everybody hangs out with everybody else. Okay? There are two symbols in each of these cells because there are two troops. So as you can see in 2009, one troop there was no assortment by boldness, but there was positive assortment for boldness in the other troop. And this looked pretty promising. When I did the 2009 data, I was like pretty excited. But then if you look at the rest of it, not much is going on. All I can say is that generally, high-ranking individuals hang out with high-ranking individuals, but we already knew that. So that wasn't very exciting. And that's for proximity. I also looked at boldness, and this is just at grooming networks. So this is another way of representing those data. I didn't test boldness in 1 year, so I don't have 6 years of data for boldness. But otherwise, here are the 4 phenotypes that I'm interested in. These are the numbers of years that the troops were assorted, either not assorted, which is represented by this, or positively assorted, like this, or negatively assorted, like this. So what you can see here is that, in general, grooming networks are more assorted than the proximity networks. This is proximity and this is grooming. And it tends to be that proximity networks are positively assorted. But there's very few general trends. It's like what happens in 1 year doesn't predict what's happening in another year. It's all very frustrating. So if I was going to think about assortment limiting the flow of information through a troop, like this is what I predicted. Actually, what happens most of the time, or in alternative years or in alternative troops, something like this happens. There's no real assortment, and then information can go as far as it likes. Okay, so that's in theory. What about in practice? So I went out and did some experiments to test whether individuals could acquire information and who they acquired that information from. So I think, yeah, okay, so now I'm interested in if this guy gets information, who spreads that information to, and if she gets information, who does she spread that information to? Right, to do that, I did some experiments. So I made patches of this preferred food, and you can see this individual is eating the food. She's then supplanted by some other individuals who come into the patch, so they've gotten the information from her. So she starts eating like this. I'll show you. So they sit in the sand, move it aside, and then fill their faces with it. And this is a really obvious signal. So some baboon all the way over here realized that he was doing that and then came over. So he's transferred information to that other individual and then also to her, and she's much slower than this big dude, and also won't get on the patch. So if an individual sees somebody eating food in the patch, I call that acquiring social information. They know that the food is in the patch. The amazing thing with the baboons is that they don't actually need to see somebody eating, they just need to see somebody shifting the sand. You can see him, she knows where the food is, and he came along too late to get it, but then watched her. And this is one of the best ones I had. So she found the patch, this guy saw her, he's dominant to her, chased her out of the patch, and then she obviously goes away because she can't get back in the patch. He sits there for 2 minutes and finishes the patch, and then sits there sifting the sand, until the dominant male of the troop sees him sifting the sand and then comes into this big patch. The food was only here, and then he starts just sifting sand as well, looking for this food. He leaves, and then the other guy comes back, and then this little fellow finds a mealy, eventually after all of that time, and then they transfer some information by smelling each other's mouths. Right. So hopefully it's obvious that they know that there's food in the patches and that's acquiring information. But then the question is, who gets it? So here's a social network of my baboon troops for this year. So each one of these nodes is a baboon, and the size of the node depends on their rank. What I'm going to show you is a little animation. So here is a node that's colored differently. That's the individual who produced information. It found the patch. You'll see that the next half second, another node is going to change. I think it jumps up to here, and then it jumps down to here. So it goes through this connection to this individual and then down here, and then hopefully it'll become obvious as these go on. Yeah. So you can see individuals getting information all over that network. Cool. This is the other troop, so I've colored it differently. You can see the individual who produces the patch, the one that finds the patch in the first place, up here. And it goes something like this. Quite a few individuals found food in this patch. And just because it took me forever to code this, I'm going to show you one more. Right. So nearly all of just about half the troop got the information from that one discoverer in that one. Yeah, and here's another one. Obviously, this individual is the knowledgeable individual, and then it goes towards to everybody else. Well, not everybody else. Nearly half the troop again.
So this is just one trial?
This is one trial. So I did 25 trials in each of the groups. That'll be important in the next slide.
How big is a group? Oh,
good question.
troop.
There are about 45 individuals in both of the troops. They're about the same size, which is super handy for me. Yeah.
How do you measure rank?
It's we record ad libitum all of the dominance interactions that occur between individuals, and we put in a program called Mapman that spits out a dominance hierarchy and then the linearity of that hierarchy. It's always strongly linear. There are very few reversals, except for the dominant males are difficult to tell apart because they never interact with each other. Super costly for them.
And do the baboons with higher rank get information last? Because I think like the bigger ones don't really light up.
Yeah, good question. So, well, that's coming up in my next slide, but I'll address that one better at the end, I think.
This is sort of related, so if you're going to get to it, that's fine. When a lower ranking individual finds out the information later, do you know that they're actually finding out the information later, or if it's just that there's a dominant, like the food, if there's a dominant individual there, they might know already, but...
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this is where I want my future research to go. So in the baboons, it's really easy to tell when an individual has acquired information because you can see that they've seen, and they sit there and stare at an individual in the patch, even if they're subordinate. So the dominant individual will always go in and take the patch. Subordinate individuals will just sit and stare and hope that they can get in later. And then they sometimes do that, so they'll go into the patch afterwards and then check the patch, and that's what I call using social information.
Right.
And then I call exploiting social information is when they actually successfully get food from a patch. It's quite complicated, and so I haven't presented those, but if you want to talk about it further after, yeah, cool. Right, so what I want to know is if the individuals that turn the colour, get the information, have more or stronger connections with other individuals in the network. So this is getting to your question. So in this network, what I've done is made the size and the hue, the darker, bigger nodes are the ones that got more social information. So this guy got the most. It's a juvenile male, actually, and he got it 14 times. This is an adult male who was just about to transfer to another troop. He got it once. So this hopefully shows you that the individuals that are closer to the middle, like it's kind of embedded, like the networks are really dense in baboons, and so it's very difficult to get like the spring embedding that you do for the cetacean societies. But in any case, the ones that are in the middle and have stronger connections, like these bigger, darker, more lines, tend to get more information. So I'll show you that graphically in another way. Cool, so these are the two troops, so this is one troop and the other troop. Here is how many times they acquired social information, and along here is their network centrality. So that's an indication of how many and how strong the connections are with other individuals. I never ever get results like this. I was so super excited. Like I never get such significant and positive interactions, correlations between things, and it's like repeated in the two troops, which I tested independently. Super exciting. To answer that second question, who acquires information? Central baboons acquire social information, and only their proximity centrality matters. It doesn't matter who their grooming centrality is, it doesn't matter what their phenotype is for acquiring social information. It's different if you look at use and exploitation, but we can talk about that later. So phenotype does not matter, just who they're next to.
What's a central baboon again?
The ones that have, like more and stronger connections with other individuals. It's actually strength, degree strength, if you know anything, but it's an awful word. So centrality will do.
Does the strength of the network not depend on how much they group?
So this is just for proximity.
Alright,
I showed you the proximity ones because that's what matters for those networks, but I also put in the grooming strength, but that only matters for whether you exploit information.
So it's a result that the closer they are to the depending on more likely they are to get.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's
yes, exactly. But they have to be with those individuals. So the network data were collected over 3 months, and the experiment lasted 2 minutes. So it's having consistently more neighbors within 10 meters, like in close proximity to you, that matters.
Okay.
But this is getting straight into my next question. So which of those networks matters most? Which is So like what I did was look at who was the nearest neighbor of those individuals for that particular one. But actually you can measure proximity in a whole heap of different ways. So this is exactly getting towards your question. So you can do just the nearest neighbour, or you could do everybody within 10 metres, or you could do, this is called the chain rule, so anybody who's within 5 metres of somebody else who's within 5 metres, or the gambit of the group. So there's 3 different rules that biologists use to measure proximity and create social networks. You can also look at grooming, for example, so this is a small female grooming an adult male. And also aggression, like I predicted that dominance would be super important for access to, to getting social information.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Like, when do you measure it? Do you average it over time, or you just measure it at the moment of giving them information? Like
So the social networks are measured over the 3-month period, and all the experiments were done in the middle 3 weeks of that 3-month period.
okay.
So I can't really measure a social network. I mean, you could measure a social network in a snapshot. The problem for baboons is that it's very difficult to know where everybody is at all times, and so what we did was, what my volunteer did, was go out every day and write down who was next to who was grooming whom, all of that, for the whole day. For
How
3
did
months.
you know them?
They have ear notches. They're also very distinguishable. But you can kind of see this guy has a rip in the top of his ear. They rip each other's ears up anyway, and we also give them notches when we trap once every 4 years or something like that. But actually, you can just tell them apart if you spend enough time with them. Cool. So I have 2 troops and 5 ways of measuring a social connection between individuals. And the important thing is that they're not the same. So this is one troop, and this is the other troop. And this is the 3 proximity measures. This is grooming, and this is aggression. I think you can see that the networks aren't the same, and so the information could be transferring through different connections differentially. So what I did was compete using these network-based diffusion analyses. These 5 networks against each other to see which ones best predicted the flow of information in those 25 presentations to both of the troops. So the first thing I asked was which networks actually work for for the diffusion of information. And it turns out that aggression is completely useless, and you can't predict the flow of information on aggression. But all 3 proximity measures and grooming do predict the flow of information. But the actual best one is who's within 10 meters of you. And this was significantly better than the rest of them. So all that really matters is if you've got lots of strong connections with, basically you've got to be in the center of the troop for the whole time, and then you get lots of information. If you're buggering off by yourself a lot and don't have a lot of individuals within 10 meters, you get very little information. It's intuitive, but I like it when things make sense.
For a baboon to be able to get into the center, I'm assuming he has to get on with everyone, right? So it would be therefore negatively correlated with aggression and positively correlated with
No, good question. I think, no, it probably is positively correlated because you're just around a lot of individuals a lot, and so you have a lot more social interactions. Yeah. So I think usually what happens is old females go to the edge of the troop because they're sick of, old low-ranking females go to the edge of the troop because they want to avoid having social conflicts with others. But I have to, this is, future research that I would really like to look at. The problem is that it's so confounded. I don't know how to look at the benefits of, or costs and benefits of sociality without controlling for sociability.
So little baboons, are they sort of aware of the fact that being in the center of the group is most beneficial? Is it something that gets passed on?
I don't know. I guess it's just experience. I'm not sure. I have to look at that one in more detail. So the centrality of the individual in the network is not necessarily spatial, but it probably is with the baboons. I haven't looked yet. I collected those data, but I haven't looked to see whether it correlates. I just assume it does. And I don't know whether they're aware of it through time. I imagine it's just experience. Okay, I'm just about done. So to summarize, my original question was for this year, how and why do individuals differ in their personal and social information use? And hopefully I've convinced you that bold juveniles are the information producers. Central individuals are the ones that scrounge social information, central in the network sense, but probably also in the spatial sense. And that proximity networks are the best for access to social information. This last part of all these experiments and the data from those experiments I did just this year. The problem with social networks is that they're dynamic through time. So this is the same troop in 4 years, and they stayed around about the same size, but they differ completely from year to year, depending on whether a female has a baby or she's lactating, whether she has whether she's pregnant, whether she's in estrus and associating with males. All of that affects an individual's network position. So I have to redo all of these experiments some other time and see if those trends stay the same. Anyway, so that's it. I need to thank all of these people, especially Alice Baniel, who let me parasitize her field season this year, and this guy, Mikel Tico-Torrents, who collected all of my social network data. He is a ninja. Thanks for listening.
Stretching my leg for a second there. Any questions?
Go for it.
What was the emu doing with the meerkat?
I didn't even know they had emus. So the meerkat project is on farmland, and this guy likes having foreign animals and has an emu, apparently now. He did have a homicidal ostrich before that, so the emu was a vast improvement. They're just curious and not homicidal. Do you also have a question?
Yes. So all of the example footage of people of when you were showing the baboons digging in the dirt for the food.
Mm-hmm.
It was someone finding the food and eating and then get chased away by someone who's more dominant. Did you ever see them? But you mentioned with the novel food experiment that there was somebody who, one of the baboons went and showed the egg to other people. So
well, not on purpose. He just.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if do they ever seem to share information on purpose?
No, not for this kind of thing. No, so there's no teaching, which would be showing information on purpose in baboons. All of the social information transfer that would look like teaching is passive. Like, so individuals will manipulate food in front of juveniles, and the juveniles pay attention. But there's none of this deliberate showing of information, especially not for those patches. In fact, the most successful individuals are the ones that didn't run into the patch, but like went. Actually, the very, very successful ones, would walk over surreptitiously, turn their back on the rest of the troop, and then put their head down to the ground instead of doing this. And they usually were the ones that stayed in the patch for the longest. There were two sneaky females that managed to do that all the time. They blew my mind. Yeah.
Is there some trade-off with being in the center of the group and finding new information? Because I assume that because there's more baboons there, it'll be harder to actually find food because other people will find food?
Yeah, right. So that's, I collected data to look at that question, but I haven't analysed those yet. So what I want to look at, it's tricky with this one because I wanted to get I wanted to get to the front of the troop and put the food down where they didn't see me put it down. But sometimes the troop would veer off. So I have, and then there were several occasions where I sat there picking up hundreds of mealies. It's fucking crazy. Anyway, that's another story. But sometimes I would just get individuals that were at the periphery or at the back and just happen to swing around. It would be interesting to look at whether particular phenotypes are always on the periphery. I have these data and I have to analyze them. Whether those ones on the periphery are the ones that find the information. But this patch is so small and I wasn't really targeting anybody that I would be surprised if, for 25 experiments, whether I found anything. But it's something to look at. Did you have a question?
Yeah, completely